But you go back to Japan often and stuff.
I like Japan a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of friends there.
They put out your books. I remember coming here and seeing like, I want this Sex Pistols book, and it was Japan only. Like
in the late '80s we did 4. There's a John Lennon, Led Zeppelin, the Sex Pistols, and Rolling Stones. That with a Japanese publisher. And actually the timing was good because the Rolling Stones. It was interesting because up until then in my life and everybody's life, Mick Jagger had been like the star. He was the Rolling Stones, you know, and Keith hadn't really said much. He never did any interviews in the '60s or '70s, and then in the '80s he cleaned up. And I think the book came out around '88 or something. And the Japanese suggested putting Keith and there's a picture of Keith and Tina Turner on the cover, and actually changed the name to the Rolling Stones featuring Keith Richard. And I was kind of surprised by that. Like, Keith Richard, he's just a guitar player. Mick Jagger's the Rolling Stones, you know. But in that time since, Keith has really kind of come into his own. And the fact, when the book came out, I think in September of that year, was when Keith started, maybe it was '87 or something, but when the book came out, Keith was starting his solo tour. And so I showed him the book, and he was on the cover, and he really appreciated that. So I got to take pictures of
expensive winos.
It's expensive winos, yeah.
That's got to be cool. I mean, like you're saying, you're a fan. Rock and roll's, you know, your life since Elvis, and you know, when these artists start to recognize your work and say like, oh yeah, that's Bob Gruen, and that's got to be great. I mean, there's probably some.
Well, nowadays it's phenomenal. People coming up who actually know my pictures or know my name since the you know, the documentary was on Showtime for a couple of months.
People come up to me in the supermarket, and I saw you on that thing, and I said a couple words, but yeah, Showtime picked that up and went crazy with it. That was really
they played it a lot, and people really liked it, and people are giving me all kinds of great compliments nowadays. So it's nice to be recognized. It's kind of a gratifying, you know, kind of vindication of my whole chaotic life. You know, my mom saw me hanging out in nightclubs till 5 in the morning every night, and kept saying, "When are you going to get a job?" You know, and I didn't realize that was my job, and that I was actually producing something in those nightclubs and theaters. You know, even though I might have had a couple extra drinks or, you know, some other what we call dry goods. You know.
Oh wow! Well, yeah. I mean, these people. It's great. It's Keith Richards that they notice you. You once told me a story. You know, I guess when you have a camera, sometimes people don't want their picture taken. And
I was taking pictures of Ronnie Wood at his house for an interview, the day that Keith's daughters were born. And Keith came from the hospital to Ronnie's house. And I remember he sat in the kitchen. I had my cameras because I was following Ronnie around the house. And Keith looked up at me and he said, "No pictures. You get the picture?" And when Keith says no pictures, I said, "Hey Ronnie, why don't we go down in the basement? We'll take it." I got some nice pictures of Ronnie with his paintings instead.
Wow. Well, I'm thinking of a different story. Maybe it's not too bad. But you were one of your heroes. You still go see him play. We've gone to see him for better or worse nights. A Bob Dylan story. When you were in Germany, walking the streets, was it?
Oh yeah, he was really upset. I snuck into a lot of the Rolling Thunder tours because it was the first time a band was playing, and they absolutely banned photography. Like, you could not bring a camera into the theater. And I felt like, you know, this is news. I'm a journalist in a sense, you know, and I felt, you know, I had to cover it. Like, so, you know, this was news. People should know about it. And so I actually put some cameras in my boots. I think the lens was in the hood of my jacket. I actually taped film to my arm to sneak it in, and then I would wait until the encore when everybody was going crazy and standing on the seats, and I stood up and got a bunch of pictures, and then they were printed in the cover of Cream magazine. It was in the NME. It was in a lot of magazines. And he had hired Ken Regan so that he could have control over every image that went out. And
Bob did.
Yeah.
Bob
And then I was in Germany. I'd run into his publicist a few days earlier, and I was planning a trip to Germany. And he said that Bob Dylan was going to play Berlin, and that sounded really exciting because I'm a big fan of Bob Dylan. I mean, I liked him since I first heard him. And actually, the first time I heard him, I fell on the floor laughing because I couldn't believe that somebody would sing like that. But then I learned to like him.
And the early photos, right? You got photos from Newport Folk?
My very first photo pass was in '65. Only I got a photo pass just because I didn't have money to get into the show, so I managed to talk somebody into giving me a photo pass. And I was down front when Bob Dylan came out playing electric guitar, and it was a big deal. Kind of like, for me, thinking about it later, he kind of pronounced, you know, that rock and roll was the folk music of America. Right. But it took a while for that to catch on and people to accept it. But anyway, a few months after the Rolling Thunder tour, I ran into the publicist, and he said Bob was playing in Berlin. And I said, "Well, if I come, can I get a photo pass?" Because I said, "I'm planning to go to Germany." And he said, "Yeah." So I showed up in Berlin, and they switched hotels or something. So I just got in a cab to go to the theater, and I figured I'd find the publicist and get my pass. And on the way, I saw this. The first thing I recognized was a bodyguard that I had been with in Japan, actually with the Bay City Rollers, and now he was working for Bob Dylan. And I recognized him, and then I saw this little hippie guy. I said, "Oh my God, that's Bob Dylan!" And I just got excited. And I made the cab driver stop, and I came down the street, and I'm walking up, and Bob Dylan must have thought like some German guy's going to talk to him, and I didn't know what to say to Bob Dylan. I was just excited to be there. So the first thing I said was to Patty Callahan, my friend, the bodyguard. I said, "Hey, Patty, how you doing?" He goes, "Oh, Bob, how are you doing?" And he started saying hello, and so Dylan got kind of bored. He started walking away, but then he must have said to Patty, like, "Who was that?" Or Patty said, "That was Bob Gruen." And he swung around. He says, "I know you. I've seen your name next to the pictures. I always said I was going to beat you up when I saw you." And he's swinging this little silver-tipped cane, and the other bodyguard's kind of moving in, like, "Oh, we're going to hit somebody?" And I'm looking at Patty, like, "I know you're working for him, but save me. You're my friend, And,
Right.
And I said, "Well, what did I do? What did I do?" He says, "You were sneaking into all those concerts." And I said, "Well, I had to. It was news. I felt, I wanted to take pictures, And then he was like, "Well, who wants to see pictures of themselves like that?" I said, "Well, I always tried to take good pictures and make sure that there were good pictures getting out." And then the funny thing, he quoted like that Patti Smith. He said, "What about that picture with Patti Smith?" And I said, "I wasn't there." And I actually knew Chuck Pullen took that picture.
Right.
It wasn't me. So, and then he walked away, and I was like shaking. And the way I've always felt about it was kind of like meeting God and finding out that he wants to kill you.
And you haven't spoken to him since then?
No, he's not a very talkative guy. Actually, a couple of people who know him say if you like him, you don't really want to meet him.
Really?
But I don't know. I wish I met everybody else I like, and I get along with them. But no, I never really got along with him.
You get along with Jake?
I almost met him a couple of times. Like once after Ratso was going to introduce me, and he was talking to a lot of people that night. And just as Ratso brought me up to meet him, he goes, "I'm not meeting anybody else tonight. I'm tired." He went and sat down. I was like, "Oh, it's just my luck. Like I'm the last one."
Right.
And. No, I never really got to talk to him.
Oh, man, well, sometimes it's good to keep. That story's good enough, I think. It's great.
But yeah, well, it was, of course, actually, then I went to the gig, and the publicist was really nice to me, and he invites me in. He said, "Oh, come on down to the catering, have something to eat." And I'm sitting there eating, and he came over to me a few minutes later. He goes, "Did you run into Bob on the sidewalk today in the street?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I did." He goes, "Why don't you go up to the back of the balcony for a while and kind of hide out, so he doesn't know you're here?"
Oh, wow. Still
all right.
You were telling that story about Yoko getting ready to go on tour.
Yeah, when in the mid '80s, after she had made a couple of records, Yoko was beginning to make plans to go on tour, and so her boyfriend suggested that she talk to some of her friends who were popular and were on tour, and she actually invited Madonna and Iggy Pop and Phil Spector and Bob Dylan for dinner, just to kind of chat up touring ideas and so on. And when I heard about it, actually I heard a couple of things. The funny part was when you walk into Yoko's house, she has all white rugs all over. It's kind of Japanese tradition. You take your shoes off. And I think Madonna said something like, "I'd rather take my bra off than my shoes off." But when I heard she had done the dinner, I was like, "Yoko, I've always wanted to meet Bob Dylan. Like, you didn't let me, know. You didn't ask, let me come over." And she was like, "No, you like him. You wouldn't want to meet him."
Wow, that's coming from her.
So yeah.
I guess it's pretty fun. I was thinking about too, like some friends of mine, other people that come here. It must be kind of interesting too when people come to buy, if they're other musicians and they want to buy stuff, what they look at, what they pick, what.
Oh
what
yeah, I always noticed that. Like a lot of times when I was doing session with bands, and they would come in, and like Joan Jett would go to see the Suzi Quatro draw, or like who goes to see Kiss, or who goes to see Led Zeppelin. And you kind of see where their roots are at.
I look at the Cycle Sluts draw.
Cycle Sluts from Hell.
Like the guy was some guy on a TV show. What he did, New York One did a thing.
Oh, he loves that
goes,
Bud Michigan.
And bands like Cycle Sluts from Hell.
Yeah.
Let's see what everybody looked like before I met them. But yeah, that's great that you have that. I think that's that accessible. Kind of like to have the archives.
Well, it's nice that I've lived here since the building opened, since 1970. And so, a lot of photographers, you have to move around because you don't make much money. But luckily, we have a low rent in here, and I didn't have to move. So a lot of photographers, their stuff ends up, there's boxes in their grandmother's garage or whatever. But if I put something in a file in 1975, it's still there. That file's still here, and the picture's still here.
It's not like the films to Bond's Casino Clash thing that got the
Oh yeah, the actual original footage, Don had it at the lab, and they were taking care of it. But the Clash weren't very active in the in the 80s and so on. And when they finally did a box set in the 90s, the company came up with some more money, and they went to the lab to get the film back. And it was on a Monday, and they had trashed it on Friday. It was like after 10 years, they thought, oh, nobody wants this, and they'd cleaned house and they'd trashed the film.
So there's just a limited.
So there's a lot of footage that Don made. Yeah. He has the rushes,
like
the
about the whole thing. I remember.
Yeah.
Because
he was filming for like a month in New York, like everything the Clash was doing. They got a loft up in the West 30s, and they were making their own posters and silk screening things, and doing a lot around town. They were recording and doing the Bond shows, and Don had all of that on film, but it got lost in the lab.
What was it like working with Don doing this film on you? The TV show.
On me, Don is the most professional guy I know, and he makes a great film. I've been in a couple of the films he's made as an interviewer. I mean, an interviewee, where he's interviewed me. And what's unique about him is that most filmmakers will get people who are involved in a certain subject that they're filming, and they'll interview them and ask them questions, and then they take this kind of jigsaw puzzle of all these different sentences and pieces, and they try to make a story out of it. Don makes his story before he starts, and he knows what he wants, and he figures out who can say those parts.
Right.
And so he'll be doing an interview with me, and he'll ask me a question, I'll give him an answer and everything. He goes, okay, and then he'll ask another question, and in the middle of and he'll just be looking at you, waiting for that word. And sometimes like in the middle of a sentence, he'll stop me and goes, okay, I got it, that's great. You said, oh, that's perfect. And you're like in the middle of a sentence, but I didn't finish. He goes, yeah, but you said the piece that he needed. And then, in fact, about my film, when Debbie saw it, she thought it was fascinating that people finish each other's sentences. Right. That he'll have one person, start a story and somebody else finish it, because he really tells a story without a narrator. He tells a story from interviews with the people who are actually involved. So it's kind of like an oral history.
I thought, and when I was doing the interview with him, you could see he would ask questions, and I could see him. Then he'd light up and be like, "Yeah, that."
Yeah, because he knows what he wants you to say.
What he wanted me to say.
Yeah.
And then I was going to say some nasty stuff about you, and you said, "Don't say it because he's English. He'll put it in." but not nasty.
What nasty about me?
No. So, but the thing that I saw in the theater, we went on Second Avenue, this big old Yiddish theater. They did a screening there.
Oh yeah, I like that place.
So I've seen it in one shot. And I don't know if that's how they show it on Showtime, but I remember thinking that it was repetitive because it was meant to be shown in segments on TV.
Yeah, the actual full-length version, they just put the 4 sections together. It was meant to be shown 1 week at a time. There's 4 segments.
Yeah,
There's like
and then it would work.
The early days, the John and Yoko, the punk, and then the later days. And then they just put it together into like a 2-hour piece.
Right.
And so the last piece repeats a couple of things from the first part. It kind of sums up, which if we had had more budget and more time, they could have edited it a little bit. But I was lucky he made it, because Don, I saw him, he made a film about the Stromerville charity, and I saw it at the South by Southwest. And I remember when I was walking over there going like, how do you make a film about a charity that's like interesting without just,
Right.
And he made a really interesting film. He found a couple of people and he followed their story from the beginning and through how the charity helped them and how they recorded songs and what Stromerville does to encourage young musicians. And it was a great film. And afterwards, we were talking, I was telling him how much I liked it, and then he just kind of looked at me and said, did anybody ever make a film about you? And I said, well, no, actually, not yet. He goes, oh, can I do it? I said, I'll bet you can do a really good one. And then I met his producer in June, and we talked a little bit, and then over the summer they asked me for a wish list of people I was friends with. And I sent them, names like, Alice Cooper, Iggy Pop, Yoko Ono, Debbie, you. And then in December he said, okay, we got a whole schedule lined up and we're coming in January, and I hadn't made a single phone call. I didn't have to call in any favors. All those people, they contacted them through the management. They got the legit permissions from everybody, and everybody showed up, which was really nice. Yoko,
said,
Debbie,
3 words, the whole scene was fuck these people.
Oh, Iggy, yeah. He sums up the whole theory of punk rock.
But like Stromerville, supporting young bands and creating, a charity for kids that don't have money or getting transport or finding ways to help out. I guess it's more of a British thing in the UK that where it's based out of. But for you, what would it be like? I always notice you have over time different people that are working in your studio, young people that come from different parts of the world that are fans of rock and roll or photography, and they get to be around you and your energy and the people and your photos and stuff. Is there anything besides just being yourself, or anything that you try to give to people, like maybe they're photographers that are just studying and want to become the next Bob Gruen or whatever? Is there something that you
Well,
about
I don't
consciously,
think
or
I
you
have
just
any
have
magic secrets. I mean, I got a couple of photo tricks I learned along the way, you know, by using a star filter to make things exciting.
Right.
But what I tell people mostly is just take a lot of pictures, because I'm not very good technically.
Yeah.
Like, you look at my contact sheets, some are too light, some are too dark, some are blurry, and there's like one good one. Well, the point is you have to edit. If you just show somebody all your pictures, you can't find the good ones. But if you find the good one and then just show them the good one, people are going to think you're good.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And that's what works for me.
Contact
You
sheets
know?
or anything, but even like movies, like Apocalypse Now, it's a pretty good movie. I mean, it's not the best movie ever, but watching the real long one, you're like, all right, editing, everything is just, you know.
It gets
getting
better
the
when you
right
cut it
thing
to the
and
right
what it
part,
is,
you
yeah.
know. And one of my pet peeves is that people go to a party and they'll put 200 pictures up on, you know, on the internet somewhere. Instead of putting 3 pictures that are really good that show it looking like an exciting party, nobody's going to look at 200 pictures and, you know, everything's blurry and people jumping around. Just put a good one there and catches, you know, gets the gist of it.